Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Women Atheists Unload. Before we get started, I just wanted to just give you a little something to think about. James Merriam Sims is considered the father of modern gynecology, who pioneered tools and surgical techniques related to women's reproductive health. Although he was very groundbreaking in this field, he developed his techniques by conducting research on enslaved Black women without anesthesia. He operated under the false and racist notion that Black people did not feel pain. Today, we know three of those names of the female fistula patients from Sims' own records: Lucy, Anaka, and Betsy. The first one he operated on was 18-year-old Lucy, who had given birth a few months prior and hadn't been able to control her bladder since. During the procedure, patients were completely naked and was asked to perch on their knees and bend forward onto their elbows so their heads rested on their hands. Lucy endured an hour-long surgery, screaming and crying out in pain, as nearly a dozen other doctors watched. As Sims later wrote, Lucy's agony was extreme. She became extremely ill due to the controversial use of a sponge to drain the urine away from the bladder, which led her to contract blood poisoning. I thought she was going to die. It took Lucy 2 to 3 months to recover entirely from the effects of the operation. Black women have a long history of not being able to have autonomy over their bodies. Enslaved women and men were only property, and even when slavery was officially ended in 1865, Black codes and Jim Crow laws reinforced the othering of Black people and having overarching effects to their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now we are continuing the conversation of the effects of the Dobbs decision that effectively turned over Roe v. Wade and the effects of this decision that will have on Black women and their ability to have autonomy over their bodies.
Clown fame, mud disease, a plague. We all love to hate, have to play the game, have to make a name. All our insecurities are on display. This is war with the enemy. Think that it was meant to be. Living in a time where disease is on every screen. I won't let them fester me. I know most are festering. Negativity is a plague for the mentally weak. No mercy, all I got is working. Never stop searching, never quench the thirst.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad that you guys can join us for our part 2 of the Darkside of Roe v. Wade. It's so good to see all of you all in the chat. I see you, Uncle Beck. I see you, Kat. I see all of you. And before we even get started, all that are in the chat and also that's watching, could you please like this video and also share it on your various social media platforms? We want as many people as possible to please come and join this very important conversation. Today, I'm joined by some awesome women who are activists, and they are also prolific in their own right, and low-key secret fan of both of them. I have Mandisa Thomas and also Madison Paige. Greetings, sisters. How are you all today?
Hey, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be here with you and Madison. I'm doing well under the circumstances.
Same.
I'm so glad to be here today with everybody, to see you guys again. Last time I saw every one of you, we were in person. And it's really good to be here with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, most definitely. Yes. And Madison is specifically talking about the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference that happened in Chicago. I believe this year is going to be the 3rd annual one. And Mandisa has asked me to come back. And so I'm really happy. And Madison, I believe you're going to be there too. And also some other awesome women who have very important things to say in their own very right. So if you guys are in Chicago at the end of, I believe, September, early October, please join us.
Yeah, we're still compiling our speaker list, so Maddie, look out for look out for some info. So yeah, we definitely we definitely hope that as many people will attend either in person and online or online as possible.
Indeed. So, guys, let's just get into it. I kind of wanted to just start a few different, you know, I think the Mandisa, I love to talk about statistics, right? I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at mentioning those things, and I just wanted to start a few things concerning this whole conversation, and then hopefully this can be a way for us to like frame the discussion. The United States has the highest mortality rate as of any high resource country, and it is the only country outside of Afghanistan and Sudan where the rate is rising. Black women are 3 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women in America. The US is one of the top 3 countries with the most expensive childcare in the world, not providing any subsidies to working families. This widens the gender equity gap as well as the Black equity gap, both pre and post COVID. 1 in 5 women will suffer from maternal health, mental health disorder like postpartum depression. Maternal depression is the most common complication of birth, yet in US, most women are never diagnosed. And although Black women are overrepresented in abortions, about 39%, they are also overrepresented in poverty, which is the number 1 factor of why one chooses an abortion. The wealth gap between Black women and white men is currently at 90%, and over 1 million families with a single Black mother as head of household are at or below the federal poverty line. So we're just going to do a round robin of this particular discussion as I just threw out some of those particular data points. Uh, Mandy's, I'm going to start with you, and then Madison, I want you to chime in. What are your thoughts when you guys hear those particular data points, especially when it comes to Black women?
Yes, so for me, it is very disparaging and still very disheartening, because it almost feels like even when we think we're making progress, that there are definitely some steps being taken aback. And these factors are institutional, right? Black women have almost never been valued in any way as far as being either in a service capacity or in some ways a sexual capacity that is not of our own consent. We tend to be seen, or we're often these caregivers. We're the caregivers to people, to our families, and to folks who ultimately, whether they realize it or not, hate us. And it's so unfortunate that even throughout the centuries, we are seen as being dispensable, disposable, and and not worthy of being valued as human beings. So, and then and some of that comes from a lot of that comes from within our own communities, the internalized anti blackness, upholding white supremacist principles and ideals, again, without even realizing it. And it is very, very, it is to a large extent extremely disheartening. And of course, that doesn't excuse personal accountability for anyone who, doesn't take the correct measures to take care of their health. However, when these options aren't even available, then it's, it is ridiculous to try to hold someone responsible for these things when they never had the tools in the first place. And it unfortunately goes to, it really goes to show how much as a community we still have, how much of a ways we still have to go with supporting each other with not just health issue, well, not just health factors, but also supporting each other just through this thing called life. Often, when our there was so much information that was coming from our elders and others in the community, and even from outside of the community. There's all of these stigmas that we have to deal with, and that were never, that just never were. And so um, it is a result of all of these years, if not generations, and also these institutional factors that make these statistics against Black women so high. But now comes the time, as to what do we do about it? How do we try to rectify this without shaming each other, and trying to educate each other more, on these things? Because to a certain degree, we know that there's a certain amount of help that we are not going to get from from certain agencies, because it's almost like they don't care. So it's like, what are we, what is it that we're going to do, and on how to educate ourselves, making sure we are a part of that process where we continue to heal ourselves, um, especially for the sake of our children,
Yeah.
especially for the sake of the children. So, I don't want to go on rambling, because, right now we are in a very, very vulnerable and sensitive state right now, especially with all of, the rulings that have been handed down by the Supreme Court, all the things that we continue to, all of the things that we continue to deal with. It can be very, very, it's frustrating. And like I said before, disheartening.
I agree. I agree. Madison, before you chime in, I first want for the people to get to know you. I mean, Mandisa, this is not her first go round on Women Atheists Unload. I'm pretty sure the community is pretty familiar with her. But I want you to first, just give a background about you and the work that you do, and then answer the question of what comes to mind when you hear the data points that I mentioned previously.
Sure, sure. I'm always very challenged when I'm asked to, talk about who I am and what I do. I guess I'll just keep it brief and relevant to this particular broadcast. So in my most recent life, my most recent iteration of who I am the founder and CEO of a political consultancy called Vote Blue Campaigns. And what we do is we work with local and state Democratic candidates to help them run. They usually don't have a lot of money. So we try to make sure that we're supporting them as they're running for local office and school boards and what's become quite important, state offices now. Um, I started this business in 2013, and I've been screaming about the importance of state and local politics for longer than that. And now here we are at a place where I think people are starting to realize, holy crap, we really dropped the ball here. So I'm glad to be able to step into that space and to be able to um, assist people who are running for office whose values most closely align with ours, and who are more likely to protect our rights than other uh, candidates. I'm also a producer. Um, I spent a lot of time in commercial production, but I also do entertainment production, and my studio is Visionarium Studios. I tend to gravitate toward projects that have some type of social, cultural, or educational value. So I'm very proud of that as well. So there's so much more that I'm into, but I that's probably all that's relevant to today's show.
Thank you for that. So when you were listening to some of the data points that I was bringing up specifically about Black women, about the uh, maternal rates, maternal mortality rates. I could also mention infant mortality rates being around, I think it's like almost 11% and highest of all races in the United States. And some of the other issues concerning not having access to childcare, even though it's very expensive, and also having such a huge wealth gap between white men. What are some of the thoughts that you actually that are invoked when you hear those things?
Right. So I'm a political strategist. So my frame of reference is always filters first through politics. And there's been a lot of speculation since the Roe decision, the reversal decision. There's been a lot of speculation about what the reasons, the underlying reasons were for that type of decision. And I don't think any of them are necessarily mutually exclusive. We, on the one hand, have dominionists and Christianists who are determined to take over the government. But we also have a white supremacist system that is intimately entwined with those Christianists and extremists, and they are concerned about birth rates of white
Mm-hmm.
babies. So there's been that speculation as well as, um, and so there's all of these ideas about why this, and then of course you can go just from the capitalist perspective. We need more workers. We're running out of people to work, and we need more desperate people. The Great Resignation has been a real turning point, and um, the people at the top are panicking. So any of those reasons, not mutually exclusive, by the way, may have been some of the impetus behind these decisions. And to be fair, the American right has been working on this for since 1973, right? Like when Roe was created, the next day they were like, we're going to undo this. So this has been a part of their agenda for 50 years, 50 years. And now it has come to fruition. So, but the thing that strikes me most about the decision is that it will accomplish all of the goals that the American right has set forth for it. It will result in more white babies because all women are at risk, all children are at risk. We can go back and look at the statistics before Roe. There were all kinds of horrible things happening to women who were attempting to terminate their pregnancies and exercise their right to planning their own families. But those things are going to happen disproportionately higher to Black women because they're already happening disproportionately higher to Black women. So if the goal was to create more white births than Black births, it will accomplish that. It will accomplish that. Even though the statistics that you said that we had one of the highest rates of abortion prior to this, that number is not going to go down. We're still going to want to seek out the terminating pregnancies because of poverty and because of complications and all kinds of things that happen. Not having no access to healthcare or little access to healthcare. All of these things are factors that caused us to have the higher rates of abortion. Those higher rates and those reasons, underlying reasons for that, are not going to disappear. And so what we will see, unfortunately, is more Black death, more childhood death. And if the purpose of doing this was to have more live white babies, that will happen. If the purpose was to create more desperate people to enter the workforce, because once you have a child and once you have to feed that child, you will work no matter what. You will do whatever it takes to make sure that your children can eat. And that means you're much more easily exploitable. And so if there intention was to create a more desperate workforce, they will accomplish that with this ruling. And that will not just be amongst Black people. It will be also, it will be across the board. And then, of course, if their intention was to usher in, uh, um, introduce the end of a secular government in America, we're on quite the path to do that right now. So all of these things going across the board are alarming because they're actually getting done what they intended to get done. And when I think about that, one of the things that I talked about at the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference last year, and when I was addressing Black women, because one of the things that I said in my talk was, I don't know what to say to politically engaged Black women who already get it. So what I ended up talking about, and I don't know if anyone here saw that, but one of the things that I mentioned, the purpose of my address was, it is time for us to return to community. As Black women and as Black people, we have to return to community, and we're going to need to begin to build those strong bonds of community between ourselves and in the larger communities in which we live, because the things that we think and thought that were going to be there in our corner and have been there reliably for a number of years, those things are going away. And then when you add to the fact that in many ways, we are fighting also some elements within our own community with this abortion issue, right? There are people in our own community who say, well, we need more Black babies. We understand that we have that fight as well. And it's not more Black babies, it's more Black women's death. It's more poverty. It's more children being born into poverty. It's more of all of the horrible negative impacts of poverty that happen that are irreversible in brain development and physical development and educational development. All of those things are impacted by poverty, and they are lifelong. We know this now. And so we have to, as I think, as women, and particularly I think is this a very, very opportunistic time for secular women. We're gonna have to be we're gonna have to be there for each other. We're going to have to develop our own systems. It sort of harkens back to the Black Panther days, right? We're gonna have to develop our own systems of of community care, because otherwise we're just gonna we're not gonna make it. This is intended to cause the type of havoc in our communities that it will cause. And if we're not okay with that, then we need to begin to structure in our communities alternatives so that we're not suffering as much as we otherwise would.
Thank you. You know, I wanted to go back to this whole element about community that you just mentioned, Madison. Um, I have found of late some people that I've worked with in the past that we've done social justice work, social economic justice work together. And I had to kind of rethink my alignment because of some of the things they have weighed in concerning this decision. And and a lot of times some of the things that I have witnessed that have been said have been pretty disgusting. And I'm curious to know from the both of you, um, how do you or can you find yourself still being able to work with people if you still see animus in some shape, way, or form when it comes to even having the conversation about Black women bodily autonomy? Um, Madison, I want to start with you, and then Mandisa, I would love you to chime in.
In general, I don't work well with others.
Okay.
There are some deal breakers for me. There's work to be done, and there are lives on the line. And I think each of us has to make a decision for ourselves what the deal breaker is for us. I don't necessarily. So I would ask. If it was me and I was working with people on social justice issues and I was asking them this question. It really helps you elucidate which values are most important to you. So I would say, what are you working on with these people, and is that more important to you than this other issue? And that's going to be different for everyone. For me, I probably care more about this than a lot of other issues in the social justice space for a lot of reasons. But everyone's answer to that question is going to be different. And if it means that I have to separate myself from, if I want to focus on that work, I may need to find a different tribe of people to focus on that work with, right? And then that other work can be, leave it over there, and we can do whatever else we do in education or whatever. But but I may need to find the tribe for that are as passionate about this issue, as I am. Everything ain't for everybody.
Yeah, go ahead, Mandisa. Chime on in.
Yeah, so of course, both of you being members of the organization Black Nonbelievers, y'all tend to know how we pretty much how I run things over there. It is, I don't care who you are. If you don't really seem to care about people, and I know that sounds broad, but there are a number of people who are very, very in a public space and on a public platform are really big on saying that they do care, power to the people, all that other stuff. But in their private lives, they treat others like shit. And there is so much in the way of religious baggage and other baggage that comes along with being indoctrinated, which religion isn't the only form. If you are dismissive towards, especially Black folks, and particularly Black women, if most of your sentiments include basically that Black women should just simply be submissive, and that we are supposed to just take whatever it is that these folks give us, then yeah, you're not going to last long in our space, because it's pretty sad at times, some of the things that we hear even from our own brothers and sisters. And a lot of that really does have to do with the indoctrination that they received. This has been passed down from generation to generation. Of course, now we're in a position where we can do something more about it rather than just sitting back and take it. As much as I love this idea of overall Black unity, I am very, very pessimistic as it, because that it's going to happen. I do think that many of us have romanticized what it meant to be enslaved in this country, what it meant to be mistreated in this country, to the point where they feel like, well, every Black person needs to stick together. And it's like, no, that doesn't have to be the case. We're not just simply one Black community. We are Black communities, and we represent various communities. And I think it's important that if you come across anyone who is exhibiting very, very harmful behaviors, it is good to take a critical examination and eventually remove them from your life as much as you possibly can. That doesn't mean that it happens with everyone. And there are some people who can learn from not knowing what they were supposed to, how it should be before. That is a very rough challenge at times. However, the phrase, when you know better, you do better. Now, if people know better, but they aren't doing any better, then that actually drags us down. That drags us down. And so at what point do you say enough is enough and just let them go about their business? Because ultimately, these are folks who will, for one, never really volunteer or participate with anything that we do. The problem is they want to stand on that bullhorn and think that, the louder their voice is, the more they will accomplish. And that just simply isn't true for a number of people. You only have a limited amount of time before, when you are in a position where you are supporting, that type of disarray and tension. Sooner or later, someone comes behind you and cleans things up. And I think it's important for us to recognize that everyone ain't gonna make it. That you sit and you observe what's happening, and then you can make a decision. You can make an informed decision on that. I think it's important for us to get to that point where we feel comfortable doing that, because ultimately, in many cases, self-care is the best care, and that means eliminating both personal and those professional barriers or challenges as much as you can, before things just start. And unfortunately, there's so much information too, Cynthia. I remember the exchange that you had with the person who was so hung up on semantics and about why, about the need for Women of Color Beyond Belief conference and what the name was taken from. I'm like, you're worried about a name? Okay. What about the substance of the content? And by the way, you can find the Women of Color Beyond Belief 2021 videos on the Black Nonbelievers YouTube channel. I highly suggest that you check it out. And of course, yours is on there, Cynthia Madison's, yours is there as well. If you are interested in learning more about our organization, what we do, please do take a look at our YouTube channel. I think it's also, it's just important to reiterate that as much as we want to help as many people as we can, sometimes that's impossible. It's like, I did not sign up to be everyone's savior. I did not. And ultimately, because trying to save everyone will kill you. And there comes a point in time in our lives where we are able to make sound decisions, or we should be able to. It depends on the individual's growth and development. But at some point, we have to make the tough decisions. And that is okay for us, because sometimes holding on to this notion of blanket Black unity is not going to get us anywhere. One thing I do is I never use any platforms to just disparage us. But if you have to call certain things out for what they are, then we should do that and continue to do that. Because ultimately, withholding that information, holding onto the same type of practices will really hurt us.
I'll just add, in my experience, there are two types of folks. There are people who do stuff, and there are people who talk about stuff. If you're working with someone, or if you're a do stuff person, don't get too wrapped up in the lives and the words of people who don't do stuff, because they're not going to do anything. So it really doesn't matter what they think. It really doesn't matter what they say, because they're not putting any of those words into any kind of action, right? So it doesn't really matter. They can have whatever opinions they want. They can feel however they want. They can talk about it. They can, they can scream about it from the highest mountain, But these are not doers. If they're not doers, then who cares what they think? They're not gonna suddenly go out and start implementing their own belief system and actually putting it into practical use. They're not going to do that. So who cares what they think? It's irrelevant. We don't have to worry about it. If you're a do person, then just do. And if those people who have a different opinion than you, or they're in a different space and they believe a different thing, if they want to do what they believe that they should be doing, then they're welcome to go out and do that thing. But you know, the funny thing is, very rarely do they do that. Very rarely.
Amen
so it's really
to
not
that.
worth worrying about. It's not worth worrying about. It's not worth thinking about. These are people who are always full of opinions, but they're not actually putting those opinions into action.
Yeah.
And honestly, if I disagree with you on something, if you were to actually go out and implement programs that agreed with your position, I would have at least a little bit more respect for you. Because at least you're doing something. You're doing something that reflects your opinion, your values, and your beliefs about what you think should happen. But what I'm not going to do is have endless arguments with people who aren't doing things. I don't care what you think. I mean, who cares what your opinion is? You're not doing anything, so that's good. Good. I'm going to be the only one out doing the thing. I'm doing the thing that I believe, and you're not doing the thing that I believe, so I don't even have to argue with you. I win. I win because my beliefs are actually being put into action in communities across the country. You can argue all you want, but you're not doing anything about it, so who cares what you think? I already win. I already win because you're not doing anything.
That is.
I'm a political strategist, so when I think of things, I think in terms of win and lose. Yeah. And I think in terms of who's doing a thing and who's not doing a thing. Who is putting their... When we look at the Roe decision, and we just talked about this, 50 years they've been working on this. These were their beliefs. I disagree vehemently with their beliefs, but by God, they were out there doing it. They were taking the steps necessary to implement their belief system and bring it to fruition. I don't like it, but I respect it. So I don't have to have arguments with people in my own community who are full of ideas and opinions if they're not going to actually implement those ideas and opinions in our communities. Who cares? Literally, who cares?
I think that for me, and I think that the mic drop moment was Madison saying, "If you're gonna do," that should be like a meme, real quick. Just want to let you know. But I think that like one of my issues, and I think that I'm also using this a little bit as a therapy session, guys. Just so bear with me. Some of the people who I've had these exchanges with are actually in the community doing, and in some and in retrospect, we do actually have aligned thought patterns when it comes to what social justice and social equity looks like for the Black community. However, when it comes to this particular position, I am seeing a lot of overarching, very toxic patriarchal ideas. I think that either Madison, I think that either Mandisa specifically, you mentioned the whole thing about, women being submissive and supposed to stay in the kitchen and being barefoot and pregnant and then serving your man. And that is your purpose. I've seen that rhetoric. And then the whole thing about, and I think that this is a tease for next week, guys, because we're going to talk about gender wars next week. But how you have some people who occupy the manosphere who have this particular ideology when it comes to women in particular. The more that they may become educated or the more that they become independent, they become problematic, including how they are relating to you. And it seems like that, when we're talking about having reproductive rights, they just look at it as, abortion is just something that is part of that feminist agenda that Black women have completely fallen subservient to, and are using abortion as a means of contraception, which I completely reject, by the way. So I think that that's my particular idea. But with all that being said, I want to ask this particular question because I was having a conversation with another person, and I want to get your thoughts about it too. I was talking to my partner, and one of the things that I said to him was that I believe that patriarchy, as we know it, walks hand in hand with white supremacy. And I do think that the evidence is written on the wall, especially when you have seen a lot of these particular decisions that have come down by the Supreme Court. So if I actually make that particular assertion that patriarchy and white supremacy are actually in lockstep with one another, is that a fallacy or is that something that can be true? And why or why not? Mandisa?
Oh, you wanted to start with me on this one.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did.
Well, you can see it in the treatment of women, and especially how it relates to Christianity and most of the Judeo-Christian religions. How women are referred to, how women are just easily, we're seen as property, as objects, but yet at the same time, we're supposed to maintain this sanctimony. So we're put in a very, very impossible position and in a no-win situation. Many of us are. And because these religions are definitely male dominated and they are geared towards giving men this power that that ultimately some of them really don't deserve. I mean, it's supposed to be in relationships. It should be a team in addition to it should be a partnership. But unfortunately, with the way societies have been structured, especially here in the United States, that certainly does not equal that does not mean equal ground or equal footing for women. And like you said, you have these folks who, when they say, "Oh, I can't," you mean, "Oh, it's you're a problem because you're not taking the shit that I used to give," and somehow we are rejecting what it means to have Black unity, and somehow we're identifying with the oppressor because we're going against each other. But it really does, and that is what's so important. That's what's so important to know about. You don't have to be white to be perpetuating white supremacy. It is, by definition, it is the belief that whites are better, but also it's about the institutions that allow them to thrive. And when we see the detrimental numbers and the mortality rates in our communities, it just reinforces that. It reinforces that, for one, that women, Black women in particular, are nothing compared to white men and even Black men. But also that, again, we are disposable and our lives don't matter. They don't matter at all. And there is, unfortunately, there's just no way that I can put it that, where we just don't see it. Because I mean, we're seeing it. And it's certainly, we can certainly dissect it. But now becomes, what do we do about it? And I think y'all both have known me well enough to know it's like, look, don't just talk, do. So I think we're all saying a lot of the same things here. We are not just looking at those who talk, and there are a lot of people who do talk. But at what point are you going to start doing? And it doesn't mean that it has to be these overarching, I appreciate that, I love Madison's work in the political arena. It's very important. And when we have these community-based organizations, we can help, support and encourage each other on how to better, on how to better get involved. I tend to focus more on the community building factor because people have to get there. They have to know what it is to have a good support system, especially after coming from families and communities that ultimately you had to, you had to conform, or it was at the cost of your personal dignity in order to stay involved. So just getting people there is very important. And it doesn't mean that it's only for women. It is for, Sakibu said something Sakibu Hutchinson, who was on our YouTube show In the Cut earlier today. She was saying, and I totally agree, that there needs to be reformed education for ages K through 12. It is still very heteronormative. It is not very supportive of how we treat each other. It does not allow for, for our boys and our girls to feel. And unfortunately, our parents and even us, we have gone through that as well. So there is a lot that we have to, there's a lot that we have to unpack here. And it's not going to be easy to do. But certainly getting back to the question at hand, patriarchy is definitely in lockstep with white supremacy, which does have its roots in Christianity and the Judeo-Christian religions. Even the Christians acknowledge that now.
Word to your mother, Madison.
Wow. Patriarchy is the oldest form of hierarchy that's ever existed, right? It existed before white supremacy. It existed before all of the other things. And there are reasons that patriarchy was instituted. And those reasons, there is a through line between patriarchy and white supremacy and any of the other hierarchies that we see that exist in our society. And now you're going to hear the anarchist part of me. The through line is that it all serves capitalism. Now, in the modern era, we call it capitalism. It wasn't called capitalism 3,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago. There were systems in place, all hierarchies, whether it be between men and women or between the races or between any of all hierarchies serve a very small number of people who benefit from them. That's the intent. So when we talk about, is patriarchy part of as part of what white supremacy is, white supremacy, of course it is. All hierarchies are a part of an underlying philosophy that we are all disposable and exploitable. And that's the point. We are all just property. Now, white supremacy took that and narrowed it down to racial group. Patriarchy takes it and narrows it down to sex. You can name any type of hierarchy that exists in society, and you can look at the base of it. And the entire point of it is to serve a very small number of people who are ruling things at the top. So I prefer to think about things like patriarchy and white supremacy. Those are real problems, but I think one of the challenges that we have on the left is that we're trying to attack all of the symptoms of the problem rather than the problem itself. When Mandisa was talking about what Sakibu was talking about education, and I mean, there's so many issues. There's all these issues, and we're all on the left. We're all working on all of these disparate issues. But they're not going to educate your children because they need an exploitable class. Why would they educate your children? Why would they give you health care and autonomy so you can, it doesn't matter where you work? Why would they do any of those things? It's not going to happen. And the reason it's not going to happen is because we are not attacking the underlying cause, the reasons why these systems exist in the way that they do. They do not want you to be educated. They do not want you to be able to plan your family. They need an exploitable class. And there are a lot of ways to get that exploitable class. And they've done a very good job of it. And actually, this isn't anything new. Thousands of years ago, women were property, not because men just wanted to be, but this was ways of securing land and territory. Having wives was about territory and land, and then you had even the royals, the rulers. They got married to expand their empires. These things don't exist just because people are like, hey, you know what? Let's do this thing. They have reasons why they exist. They have reasons why they've been put into place. All of these things that are happening have reasons. None of them are new. And all of them have reasons. And the through line of all of them is what we today call capitalism, but it wasn't always called capitalism. Basically, for this very small number of people to benefit from exploiting and bleeding all of the rest of us dry, using us as property and as and extracting the better part of our lives for their own benefit. That's what it is. That's what it is. That's it. That's it. There's nothing else.
Well, there you go. I was thinking about what you were saying, Madison, about like none of these things are new, right? I can even think about when I did my speech at the Better Conference in Fort Wayne a few weeks ago. One of the things that I talked about was how the racial concept actually started. And it was all about securing a labor class of people in order to continuously perpetuate a way for capitalism to be wrought in first America and then the United States. Like it was just based on something arbitrary and not scientific, which was skin color, you know, and and it was all about, oh well, the previous labor tenants that we actually had here in Virginia and Maryland are not working. We need to come up with something else because there's going to be another uprising. Hey, when we separate these people and just call it, instead of saying English and Christian, we're just going to call it black and white, you know. And now and then that's when you actually started to see like a lot of these different laws that was codifying that system into practice in the Virginia Burgess House of Burgess rather government, and then it eventually bled into the Constitution of the United States of America. So yeah, you're on point, and and I know that like I know you're prefacing our anarchy, but hey, I think that when we first walked into the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference last week, like last year, one of the things that I remember talking to one of the presenters that was there, or one of the tables that was there, was when I was introducing my partner. I said, oh, one of the things that he called me was his favorite communist. Favorite communist. Yeah, I wear the label proudly. So I want to remind everybody, because I know that Mandisa will have to be leaving fairly soon. So if you do have questions, to please put them in the chat. Make sure you at Skeptic Haven so that we can go ahead and highlight those questions, and then our panel will be able to answer them. I wanted to ask another question to the both of you. Are you familiar with oh my goodness, Shahrazad Ali?
Yes, I'm familiar with her. I remember when her books, the first was The Black Man's Guide to Understanding the Black Woman came out,
Yes.
as well as The Black Woman's Guide to Understanding the Black Man. And of
Yes.
course, when it first came out, women were outraged. There were
Yes.
a lot of brothers who were like, yeah, right on.
Yes.
And then when she came out with the other book, I guess it was supposed to be holding men accountable as well.
Yeah,
I know
supposedly.
supposedly, but
Yeah.
I know she has said she's had some controversial opinions over the years. I mean, she probably wouldn't be the first, or the last.
Sure.
I've seen her name around lately.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure what's going on exactly
Yeah.
with her, but perhaps you could enlighten us or enlighten me.
Yeah, she's been making her rounds on the YouTubies. People have been asking her to on their various platforms to weigh in on different topics. I happened to see a conversation with her with this another person called I don't know her full name, but she goes by Dr. Ma'at. And Dr. Ma'at said on a previous iteration of her platform, when the decision of Roe v. Wade came down, that this is not a Black woman's issue, that we should stay out of the fray. And then she ended up having Shahrazad Ali come on her platform to kind of solidify those conversations. So basically, asking should Black women be involved with really saying my body, my choice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that Shahrazad Ali said was that I do agree with is that when it comes to these particular issues, that when it comes to Black women and white women and the issues that we have with if you happen to be cisgender or heterosexual, uh, when it comes to relating to our partners is different, and even how we are looked at in society is different. I do agree with that because that's absolutely true. However, when we are talking about if we are trying to take that frame, putting it in with possibly advocating for reproductive rights, and if Black women should be involved, she said, because we do have different positionality in the United States and some of our issues are different, that we should not be involved. So, with that being said, what are you all's thoughts about our role when it comes to advocating specifically for reproductive rights? Should this be something that Black women should be doing, or no? And Madison, I'll start with you first.
Black women have already been doing this.
Sure.
We've already been doing it.
Sure.
We show up at the polls in a rate of 97%. It's not that it's not our problem. This result is not we didn't bring this about. We have done everything possible. We have done everything possible to prevent this from ever happening. I don't know what else we can do. We didn't put that guy in office who elected these Supreme Court judges who have made this decision. We didn't do that. It's comical to me that people say, well, should Black women be involved in this? What should we be doing that we haven't already been doing? These decisions result from elections and from people who are in power and make decisions. We, as Black women, have been the only reason this country hasn't devolved into this state much, much sooner than it has. I don't know my question for anyone who says, should Black women be involved? So what should we do? What should we do? Give me 3 ideas about what we should do to advocate. Because a march isn't going to do anything. I'm not doing that. Tell me 3 actionable things that you think Black women need to do something about it. Because in my book, there's only been one way. And that has been show the fuck your ass up at the polls and make sure that people who support reproductive rights and female autonomy are elected. I'm not a fan. Listen, Cynthia, I'm like you. I'm an anarcho-communist, so they're not exclusive. But we are in the system that we're in, and there are people whose values more closely align with mine.
Sure.
Are they identical? No, but their values more closely align with me. I have done everything that I can do And so I don't know what people even mean by that. I'm curious what they even mean by. I'm like, what do you mean? What would she do? Go on a march? Put on one of those costumes? Like, what do you want me to do? Ladies, this is up to y'all. Not because we don't want to be in the fight, but because I can't make the 52% of you who support white supremacy and patriarchy, I can't figure out what's wrong with you. We wouldn't be in this position if y'all had acted right in 2016. I don't know what to say. I don't expect anything from white men. I have low expectations of white women, but I mean, when they say, well, we should all be working together, ma'am, what do you want me to do? I've done all of my job. You need to go and talk with your people and gather them up. And maybe now this is some real shit for y'all.
Well, I think that she was actually saying that we should not be involved with this conversation.
I know. There's nothing for us to do. It's not a matter of should or should not. There is nothing else for us to do. That's my point. There's nothing. What do they mean by involved? In what way? We've done everything that there is possible to do. I don't know what that means. Should we be involved? Yes or no? It's not even a question. Should we be involved? We've already been involved, and I don't know what more we could do, even if the answer was yes. If the answer was no. I don't even know what that means. Let's define what it means to be involved in fixing this. What does that mean? You see what I'm saying? Like, what does that mean? Before we can say yes or no, tell me what being involved even means.
I know you're an atheist because you asked for a definition.
I need to understand what we're talking about. Like, I don't understand what we're talking about. I'm like, what do you mean should we be involved? I don't know. What is involved? What does that look like?
Indeed. Mandisa, what do you think about that when you hear that?
Well, I certainly agree. I mean, Black women have always been involved. As a matter of fact, Black women don't get the credit that we deserve for even being at the forefront of the feminist movements, of the reproductive justice movements. We have always been, and to hear of the Black women say that is also, they are discrediting the work that other Black women have already done. And it's not just simply about do you not care about, the fact that we do suffer from higher mortality rates? What else are we supposed to do? But the problem is when it seems like we are working against each other. When people say stuff like that, it's also, like I said before, another indication of white supremacy being upheld, because it's like you're diminishing us. To know that we have these issues, to know that these things are ultimately working against us, but yet we are at the forefront, right? It's like, well, why shouldn't we be involved? And if there is something that is going to impact human beings, because it's not just the women that are being impacted, it's our children, it's our communities, and I think that people like that, it always is sad how for some people it takes for something to impact them on a personal level for them to care. That is at a core that is a major problem. It's like, if something doesn't happen to you personally, then it means that you could give a shit about it. And that is a totally individualistic way of thinking, which will ultimately hurt us.
Right.
And, then people need to do more of their homework about the Black women that were involved in feminist movements, and also at the forefront of reproductive justice. You don't just get to say something like that and you don't know, or it's like, well, maybe I cannot, I'm only speculating as to what is in their head when they say this. However, maybe they're thinking that Black women's erasure hasn't been, their hard work and their credit, because they didn't receive it. Maybe it's not beneficial. But there is no movement that improves overnight. No resistance movement. And we can look through history for that. And so when you have these women saying stuff like this, they're also, again, they're discounting the work that Black women have already done. And it's another way of perpetuating white supremacy. And I mean, even if I don't necessarily agree with everything that every historical figure has done, I have to give credit where it's due. I mean, that's only right. That is only right. And I mean, black people and Black women have been involved in all sorts of movements. And I mean, just the basic health of ourselves and our communities, that should be important to everybody. I mean, it should, of course, like you said, with the systems that we have now, it doesn't necessarily mean that would happen, but that is where we kind of can and we can kind of take something. And that's why I said, you know what? I mean, as much as we would love to achieve this sense of Black unity, I think we have to vet. It's important to vet. There's always going to be some folks, and we're not a homogenous, or we're not a monolithic community. We've always had differences of opinions. We've always had differences in thought. Mm-hmm. But being able to take and understand where this person may be coming from, even if we don't agree, that's the problem. Sometimes it's like it's all or nothing in these situations, and something about that needs to change.
I hear you. I know that you have a hard stop in approximately 4 minutes. So, Mandisa, I want to give you room to chill before you go away. And then we'll get to a couple of the questions in the audience. And then there is a video that I would like to play before we wrap up our conversation.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you again for having me on this platform, again. I really do appreciate it. I love working with all of you, and the fact that now we are building this network. We are building this network of particularly Black atheist women, who we are uplifting each other's voices. And when we empower each other and support each other, then we become stronger. So I just encourage everyone to follow Black Nonbelievers, visit our website, subscribe to our email, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Please, please, please do support the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference. That takes place from September 30th through October 2nd, because we have more phenomenal women who have a lot to say and who are also doing the work. And especially as the non-religious population grows, especially among people of color, you are going to see more content from us. You're going to see more work from us, and that deserves to be supported. So thank you.
Word. Thank you, Mandisa. And let us go ahead. And also, I think you're in Houston now, aren't you?
I'm currently in Houston. I will be speaking with the Oasis group tomorrow, starting at 12:30 Central Time. So that information has been posted. So if anyone is interested in attending either in person or via YouTube, you can do so. You can subscribe to the Houston Oasis's YouTube channel.
Yes, that is a project by Will Judy, who was also honored at the American Atheist Convention earlier this year. So I know that Mandisa will kill it, because she always does. I'm even very excited because I will be speaking in Houston in October for the Houston Oasis, saying things. So yes, best of luck to you, Miss Mandisa Thomas. Thank you again for joining us for this conversation. You know I love you, sis, and I guess I'll see you in 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Mm-hmm. Something like that. Yeah, so 2 to 3 weeks. Yeah. Something like that.
Love y'all too. Thank you.
All right. Bye, sis.
Bye.
All right, Madison. So you're up. We have questions. We have questions, and I'm going to ask our producers to let's go ahead and go through those questions before we wrap up our show. So the first one, if we can go ahead and put that on, can you talk about? I'm not familiar with this particular Supreme Court case. Maybe Madison, you are, but can you talk about the upcoming Supreme Court case, Moore versus Harper, in October, and how it will impact POC or people of color in the United States?
I'm gonna need to do a quick Google on Moore Harper.
Yeah, yeah, I was thinking the same thing because hold on, because like Moore versus Harper. Okay, this is a class action suit. Let me see if I can get like a overview as soon as I can. I credit myself for having like amazing Google skills. They serve me well. Uh, but let's see. Okay. So so this is the issue. Whether a state judicial branch may nullify the regulations governing the manner of holding elections for senators and representatives prescribed by the legislature thereof, and replace them with regulations of the state court's own devising, based on vague state constitutional provisions, purportedly vesting a state judiciary with power to prescribe whatever rules it deems appropriate to ensure a fair or free election. I think this is mostly dealing with, voting per se. If holding elections should be prescribed by the state legislatures versus, I guess, the state judiciary, and how they would determine what free elections look like.
Right. So I am not 100% sure that this is what, but I do know that there is a movement for, there used to be a time when state legislatures assigned senators.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
They assigned them. And
yes,
so, um, the American right is relentless. They're very smart. They're very strategic. They're relentless, and they're very focused.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, honestly, the reality of the situation is that this country was not established to for anyone other than the handful of tiny little people, a couple of people, landowners and slave owners.
Right.
And they came here and they liked the idea of not having a king because they really didn't want to have somebody else telling them what to do.
Right.
But they also figured we want to be the ones that tell everybody else what to do.
Right.
So they were the only ones that were allowed to vote. They
right.
were the only ones allowed to make the decisions. All the rest of the people were completely disempowered.
Right.
It was never supposed to look like this.
Exactly.
When they wrote the Constitution, it was never supposed to look like this. It was never supposed to be black people and women and all these other people voting and craziness. It was never supposed to be that. You were supposed to be white, male, and landowning.
Right.
That's it.
That's it.
So when I talk about the American right and their policies, I try to help people see that everything that they do, every policy that they support, basically is an attempt to move closer to that original state.
Yes.
So, for example, they are anti-regulation.
Yes.
The reason they're anti-regulation is because there were no rules for the people who had land.
That's right.
And who had property. There were no rules for those people.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The reason they don't like minimum wage laws is because free labor is better than having to pay for it.
That's right.
They don't want you to go to school because people weren't going to school back then. In fact, for black people, it was illegal.
That's right.
To be educated. Right? They don't want you to have health care because why? Back then, whether you got to see a doctor was tied to your owner.
That's right.
Okay. And so that locked you in with that owner. So if you look at the American right, and this is not just the American right, this is conservatives across the world, but I'm talking about America. When you look at the American right and you think about their policies and the things that they support, we have to remember that their goal is to get back to that point in time when the only people who had a voice were people who owned land, and it won't be that this way again because now too many people own land, so they'll come up with a way to cut that off,
Of
you know.
course. Yeah.
And because too many people have own property now, so that's that they got to come up with a different rule. But
Sure.
at the end of the day, they want to get back to the place where there's only a handful of people who are making the decisions, and this sounds like this ruling is probably one of those that would further that cause.
Yeah, it's always been an uphill battle in the United States for Black people to vote. If you all remember, the the 15th Amendment that was ratified, I want to say in 1867, was to give the former enslaved the right to vote. Which, if anybody remembers Susan B. Anthony, she absolutely had a problem with because it gave Negro men the chance to vote before white women, and she was like, "How dare you have Negro men vote before white women?" So that's still that idea of like racism and me being in a more privileged space. We see you, Karen, was still a thing. Uh, but regardless, like, and the whole time, I find it so funny in that particular history that in the suffrage movement, they included, or they were like actively recruiting Black women, Negro women, but it was still at the behest of white women being in control. Okay, they and I can understand some of the skepticism with some of the sisters when it comes to feminism, because they look at it in a way where this is basically an argument between white women and white men for white women to have power. But in the same case, there are still some ideals of feminism that I do agree with. And the reason being is because no one should have the right to tell you as an individual what you can and cannot do with your life. You are not property. You are not chattel. You are not a cow. You are not supposed to go to the the barn where you can get milked and have your milk sold to market, and then when you don't produce anymore, we're going to send you to slaughter so you can become meat. Okay.
Right.
So this is exactly what should not be done. And here's the thing: those ideas that the Christo fascists, the patriarchal society that we have now, still implore those ideas, and they are even more oppressive when you actually go down the totem pole, this hierarchy that we call white supremacy, especially when it comes to Black women. So so when we are looking at cases like this, and I can even think of one specifically in Louisiana where the SCOTUS like ruled that gerrymandering basically is okay. They did the same thing in Wisconsin as well. And this is again just so that they can utilize a way for a certain group of people to have control when it comes to who is in office. Because who is in office is going to determine basically who is able to make the decisions on who has and who has not. Let's keep it a buck, And this is one of the reasons why during the civil rights movement, when there was a push for especially voting and registering people to vote, and also taking away these laws when it came, especially in the South, when it kept people away from voting, that they were trying to overturn, because there's a power in a vote. There's power in how you are going to the polls, whether if it's midterm elections or whether if it's for a general election, for you to say who represents you and who does not. And I absolutely reject this notion, even within our own community, about, well, nothing changes anyway, I shouldn't vote. I said, no, you should, because if you think about all these different laws and all these different ways that people are working against your group to vote, maybe it's because something is in that exercise of a civic duty that would actually be advantage to you rather than not. But like you mentioned earlier, when it comes to these Christian nationalists, the conservative right, the crystal fascists, whatever name we're coming up with today, this is a long game. They played a long game in order for them to get to where we are today. This was not something that was overnight. It's just that, those who are really caring about how we are governed and how we are, moving forward with our lives, we need to be willing to commit to the long game too, because this, especially when it comes to Supreme Court justices, I mean, this is a lifetime appointment. And even with the older ones, like I think Justice Thomas is like the oldest one that's on the Supreme Court right now at 74. But last time I checked, he has no reported health failings that is going to make him die anytime soon. So I mean, hell, my grandmother died in 97. So so that's something to consider. So yeah, I think that, in the short of it, any case that has to deal with voting and how people are represented and being able to choose their representatives is always going to affect Black communities, other non-white communities, in an adverse state, because it's all about who has power and who doesn't. And everything is always going to be about maintaining the hierarchy of white supremacy, racism. Fight me if you want. Let's go to the next question. Hey, Beck. Okay, so what can we white folks do to help and advocate? How would you like us to advocate? I'll start with you, Madison.
Well, I mean, I guess the first question is, advocate for what?
Mm-hmm.
But I think really the biggest problem that we have is, so I'm going to assume that we're talking about Roe because that's the topic today. So if this person is asking how can you help advocate, honestly, at this juncture, I think that the case has been settled. I think that one of the most important things that people can do is, if you're not deeply involved in what's happening at your state level, you need to be. That's one thing. But that's sort of, again, a long game, because like there are states that are probably never gonna change. So what can you do right now? What you can do right now is be in community with other people. In your community, where you live, you can create mutual aid groups to find out who has needs. Who has needs? And how can you, as a person who has perhaps a little bit more privilege, how can you use that privilege to help someone else who doesn't? So I think one of the most encouraging things that I saw after the decision of the Roe came down was so many people saying, screw that, you can stay in my house, I'll drive, I'll do this, I'll do that. I think those are very important action items, direct action items that you can do right now. In terms of advocacy, I think for white people, I think there's two things. One, and I think, direct action is always going to be the most important thing, because there are people who have needs right now, and how you vote is a good thing, whatever, but that's a long game. So find out what the needs are in your community and use what you can to ease the needs and the challenges of people in your community. But in addition to that, you can We got here in one way and one way only. We have a lot of people in this country who have the American right has used race to get us to this position. This all started because Barack Obama was elected. And they have used race to consistently have a disappointingly high percentage of white people support policies that, in fact, not only hurt white people, but hurt black people too. They hurt black people, but they hurt white people too. But they're okay with that as long as it's hurting people of color. And I promise you, if you're white, I promise you, if you're white, one of them is in your immediate family. At least one of them. I am not telling you that you can change their minds, but I am telling you that you better think about how you might be able to communicate with them in a way to get them to understand things that supersede race. I think we're getting to that point. And I'm going to tell you, I think we're getting to that point because people are being squeezed. People paying $5, $6 for gas. People can't afford food. I see people sitting outside in a Mercedes Benz getting food at the food bank. And they're white. I think this is an ideal opportunity for you, white person listening who gets it, to begin to have conversations with your people. And to help them understand that we are in a class war. Ultimately, we are in a class war. And they've been using race to get those people to continue to vote against their own interests. But you have to pay $5 for gas just like I got to pay $5 for gas. And so now you have an opportunity to try to get a little bit of leverage in to introduce a different framing for what's happening in this country. Because honestly, the only way America's going to get out of this is for the white people who keep voting against their interests to stop doing it. Because the people of color have always been voting in a certain way. There's no other room to go. So talk to your friends. Talk to your family members. Use a different framework. Don't talk about race. Talk about class. Because that's what they need to hear. And they're feeling it now, probably more than ever. So you have an opening and an opportunity. You do.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the journalist named Elizabeth Wilkerson. She wrote a book called Caste and the Origins of Our Discontent. And this particular book was equating basically the racial structure to a caste system, which I agree with. And here's the thing. Anytime that you are exacting policy, whether if it's benign neglect or whether if it's actually an overarching policy to disenfranchise like a certain group of people or a marginalized group of people, eventually any person who's adjacent to that or group of people will feel the effects of it as well. Even though, like, yes, Black folk is disproportionately poor over everybody. Black folks are disproportionately experiencing issues concerning police violence and also health issues and health disparities and things of that nature. But when you have an inequitable system, not just health, but also when it comes to how we are represented in the judiciary system, how we are represented when it comes to resources and the like, other people who may not end up in the upper echelon of the caste system are going to suffer as well. And it's going to be more people who happen to be of that ilk than not. I can remember reading about some of the inceptions of race and how one of the resources that I read said that you had some people who were classified as white all of a sudden lessen their animus towards the chiefs and what have you that was in charge, because they were able to say, oh, because I'm white, I'm able to have access to all the same things that the benefactors do. Okay. And in some cases, yes, that's true, but that's not all of your group. So I think that I'm agreeing with Madison when she said you need to talk to your people. And also too, and I said this at the conference, at the Women of Color Beyond Belief conference. And this, because a similar question was asked to me after I gave my talk. And I said, there are plenty of people who advocate in this particular space. And one of the things that white people have a tendency to do is to gatekeep because they feel that they can advocate or do something better, but they only been there for 2 minutes. Allow the people who have been doing the work to do the work. And when they give you instructions, you just say, okay. Yes. So, on that note, Madison, I want you to go ahead and just tell the people what you have coming up next, and anything that you want to let people know about, that you want them to support. This is your opportunity to do it. So shill away.
I really don't have anything to shill. But if you want to get more involved in your state politics, I invite you to go to boldbluecampaigns.com. It is my political consultancy. I work directly with local and state candidates, and we do that all over the country, and we do not pick and choose. We support anyone who has made the choice to throw their hat in the ring. We don't care if they're in a deep red district or wherever they are. We want to make sure that there is representation, and there are all voices. The voices, a lot of elections, there's only one person on the ticket. We've got to stop that. We've got to give people at least a couple choices. The other thing is, if anybody sort of wants to keep up with me personally, you can go to my political website, which is strategicextremist.com. Strategicextremist.com. That would be me. That's sort of my political hub page. So that might be something that's of interest to you. Or, of course, if you'd like, you can go to my personal page where there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. And my site, I apologize that my site is currently being reworked, but you're certainly welcome to go up and join my newsletter list at madisonpaige.me. That's madisonpaige.me. So there's 3 websites: boldbluecampaigns.com, strategicextremist.com, and madisonpaige.me. Come swing by and let's keep the conversation going.
Thank you, Madison. I appreciate that. And thank you for coming on. I do appreciate you coming here when I said, hey, Madison, can you please join this conversation and have a talk about abortion and Black women? And you was like, yeah, I appreciate that so much.
It's a conversation. One of my favorite people. I appreciate you asking me. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much as well. Well, everybody, I just like to offer a few words before we close out. As of late, I know like a lot of people are afraid, and especially when you are looking at some of the ramifications of the decision of Roe v. Wade happening in real time. There's been a lot of talk about that young girl who was 10 years old in Ohio who had to travel over state lines to Indiana in order for her to get an abortion because she was raped. And I believe the person who raped her was her mother's boyfriend, if I'm not mistaken. And it's a shame that you even had people from the religious right that came out to say that she should have had the baby and that she could have actually learned the benefits of being a mother. I said, what in the fuck does a 10-year-old have to benefit from having a child?
Gross.
It's disgusting.
It is.
And even when I was having these conversations before we were broadcasting with, other people that I mentioned earlier, who were coming up with all types of disgusting notions concerning why they supported the decision. And especially when it came to Black women's accountability, she wanted to not have children before she shouldn't use the abortion clinic. She should have made that decision when it came before she went to the bedroom. And I'm like, okay, so she's having kids by herself. All of a sudden, she turned into an arthropod and was able to have, become a progenitor by mitosis. This is what you're telling me.
Mm-hmm.
Black women all of a sudden are insects.
Yeah.
And they are having progeny by mitosis. That is exactly how humans do not have children. So why in the fuck are they the only ones that's supposed to have the accountability talk to them? I don't understand that. That makes no sense whatsoever. And I need you guys to stop this, because when it comes to actually reproductive rights, when we're talking about abortion or even having to make the decision if you're going to have an abortion or not, it's a matter of healthcare choices. It's not because abortion is easy. It's not because people are just so willy-nilly to do it. It's because there are certain decisions that they have to make that's of their own that has nothing to fucking do with you. Stop saying that abortion is murder. You cannot murder a molecule. Even the Bible says that, according to Genesis 1, that life is not until first breath outside of the womb. Stop saying these things that make no sense, that are not backed up by medical or scientific proportions, and stop using your feelings and also your indoctrination in order for you to make your decisions when it comes to other people's decisions on what they do with their bodies. I need you to do that right now. Now, I don't know if you're going to do it, but the fuck, I need you to do that shit right now. So before we go, I have a video that I want to play by Sakivu Hutchinson, who is an activist in California. She is also the founder of the Black Skeptics Group, and also is going to be speaking this year at the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference in Chicago this year. And she was even on the Black Nonbelievers in the Cut channel this morning talking about this very issue. So we're going to go ahead and play this. I hope you guys enjoy, and then we are going to be out.
Good afternoon.
Okay, 1 second. Can you guys can
International Women's Day. We are going to shut down the fascists who are trying to corrupt and destroy women's rights to self-determination and bodily autonomy. In 1974, in her anthology In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Alice Walker wrote, "Did you have a genius of a great-great-grandmother who died under some ignorant and depraved overseer's lash? Or was she required to bake biscuits for a lazy backwater tramp when she cried out in her soul to paint watercolors of sunsets? Or was her body broken and forced to bear children who are more often than not sold away from her? 8, 10, 15, 20 children, when her one joy was the thought of modeling heroic figures of rebellion in stone or clay. It is a question with an answer cruel enough to stop the blood." Walker's visionary words call up a brutal history of institutionalized rape and forced childbearing inflicted on enslaved Black women. She skewers the American as apple pie terrorism that shaped racial capitalism and enriched white supremacist wealth and theft. For decades, we pro-abortion, unapologetically pro-abortion Black feminists have stood for Roe and on-demand access to abortion as a fundamental, inalienable human right. We publicly hailed the liberating effect our own abortions had on our lives, economic independence, mobility, free from state apartheid, white supremacist, capitalist, heterosexist violence. We slammed the escalation of white supremacist Christian nationalism since well before the Reagan-Bush years, when Black women were being demonized as welfare queens. We've insisted that Black women's leadership in reproductive justice and economic justice resistance be foregrounded as a counterweight to the narrow pro-choice agenda advanced by white women feminists. Let's be clear, pro-death, anti-abortion public policy, terrorist attacks on clinics, doctors, and the creation of these sham crisis pregnancy centers are all a form of race, class, and gender warfare, disguised as religious morality crusades to protect so-called innocent babies. There are 59 countries globally that have actually expanded abortion protections, while the U.S. is in reverse, the so-called exceptionalist U.S. The capitalist theocracy who put the thug Christian fascist supermajority on the Supreme Court are saying, fuck you to women and LGBTQ folks with a bloody coat hanger. They're spewing the toxic sanctimony of Christian morals while shutting down equitable access to health care, to living wage jobs, to universal child care, to voting rights, and anti-racist, pro-queer education, as well as decarceration. And we've seen in fascist states like Texas and Florida how they are terrorizing trans kids. They are terrorizing non-binary kids with legislation that seeks to criminalize queer identity, that seeks to witch hunt LGBTQ families who are supporting their children, that seeks to witch hunt and muzzle teachers that are unapologetically supporting queer, trans, non-binary, and non-conforming youth. This perfect storm of domestic terrorism drives the theft we know of decades of multi-generational wealth of communities of color. It's because of this that Black women only have a minuscule penny to the dollar of white families. It's because of this that Latinx women and indigenous women earn less than 60 cents than white cis men. This pro-death regime does not want a free-thinking, unbought, and unbossed working class. It relies on lies and cultural propaganda to victim blame and victim shame women of color into moral submission. Over a decade ago, some of us know that the right propagandized that abortion was quote-unquote Black genocide. It pissed on generations of reproductive justice activism by freedom fighters like Sister Psalm, by freedom fighters like the Kamhi River Collective, which was a Black lesbian socialist movement. Black women we know never, ever had the legal right to quote unquote Planned Parenthood because we were always considered to be chattel, to be property, to be animals, to be breeders, to be beasts of burden. We are never considered to be worthy of protection under the law to this day in the 21st century. We're never considered to be the rightful owners of our bodies and our communities, which is why we are going to shut down the white supremacist Christian fascists that want to tell us otherwise. We know these anti-abortion bills are most prevalent in states that have some of the worst health and poverty indices for women of color and children in the nation. Georgia, for example, has the second highest Black maternal mortality rate. It's an atrocity. Alabama ranks 49th in infant outcomes with scores of Black Alabama children under the poverty line. And so they claim God, this immoral, corrupt God, as their compass. These theocrats that are driving more working class children into abject poverty. 2 decades ago, when I gratefully and appreciatively and unapologetically and swaggerly had an abortion in LA and in Connecticut, we had the very same trolls right out in front of the clinics trying to shut our rights down. White men, refugees from the Operation Rescue movement, as some of us may remember. There is a direct through line between these terrorist trolls and the slave catchers of Alabama antebellum. There is a direct through line between these terrorist trolls and the Christian fascist supermajority on the Supreme Court, as well as their white male lieutenants in the state houses in the Midwest and in the South. So for Black women who are watching, our ancestors who are watching and asking, did you have a genius of a great-grandmother who shoved a coat hanger up her vagina? Did you have a genius of a great-grandmother who tried to throw herself down the stairs or took toxic herbs to find a way to her own body? Did you have a free-thinking, trans great-grandmother who resisted, who led quiet uprisings, who scribbled poetry in the dead of night, or who worked her fingers to the bone at a job that she despised, hiding her queerness? Did you have one who time traveled, dreaming of your existence, hungering for you to demand justice now in their name, and who conjured you here and now, waiting for you to answer that we will not back down, that we are fighting for abortion on demand, out, proud, and without apology, and without retreat, against the terrorists, against the fascists, against the theocrats, and against this lie of American exceptionalism.
I know you told your friend you're not okay, and tell me what's wrong and why you never said you felt that way. And guess you're trying to stay strong and fake a smile until I look away. But I've known you too long, it hurts to watch your blue eyes fade to gray as you fade away, as you fade away.
Yeah, I'm about to fade away, cause every time I wake up I feel like it's Monday. Something's going wrong with all the chemicals up in my brain. All of a sudden I don't look at anything the same